Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to invite you to join me on the next Legal Lines. I'm very proud to have on the show Judge Bob Downing. Judge Downing is a First Circuit Court of Appeal judge here in the state of Louisiana, and he's going to talk about a passion of his, and that is trying to reduce crime in the state. He's been a criminal court judge at the trial level, also a drug court judge, and of course he's on the appellate court. And he's going to talk about the factors that he's seen that seems to be repetitive in all criminals that he's dealing with and how he thinks we can solve those problems. So join me on the next Legal Lines with Judge Bob Downing.
Come on, David. Come on, David. Let's go, David. Come on.
Come on, David. You got the love.
Get as involved in your kids' education as in everything they do, and imagine the success they might find. Stay in touch with the teacher. Visit the school. For more tips, call 1-800-281-1313.
Good, David. Good, David.
Welcome to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and very pleased to have on the show Judge Bob Downing. He's been on a couple times before. We're going to talk about a passion of his, and that's dealing with crime. Judge, thank you so much for being on. Let's kind of lay the foundation for why anyone would believe what you say as being something that could work or where we've got problems. Let's talk about how you've been involved in the criminal system in the past.
Okay. I didn't want to be on criminal court, but the new guy on the court gets stuck on criminal, and I didn't want to be there. I had avoided bullies, I had avoided criminal law, and I get there, and the problem with being a judge is you're the boss the first day. Most people don't take advice, you know, so here you got a job, there's no training for it, and who do you take advice from? And I noticed that I almost never saw anybody in criminal court that had a high school diploma, had a loving father at home. Most of the people are from either fatherless homes or abusive fathers. The father is one of the key things in crime.
And I guess criminals are what, 90% male?
Right, 90% male, and they can't name their pastor. They say they're Baptist or Catholic, no church, no pastor. Of course, we never saw any Episcopalians or Presbyterians. They all do federal time and not state time. But I became concerned, and you keep seeing the same people over and over again. Well, I'm a very logical person. When I do something, I expect a result. And so no one could tell me how many years you send somebody to prison to make a better person. And I'm looking at this, and nothing makes people better in the criminal system. When I got there, there was no program to send anybody to on probation. The prisons had very few programs. I said, well, how are you going to take people that make bad decisions?
And usually multiple offenders.
Right, and put them in a place where you don't let them to make any decisions, and then you expect them to make better decisions when they get out?
And not hanging around with pristine folks either.
Right. Yeah. The little girl at Senecor that went to prison, and Senecor is a 2-year drug program that I'm on their board. She said she did minor crimes, and then she learned how to do major drugs and major crimes when she got to prison. You know.
What is the breakup in the criminal area of drug-related versus theft versus physical violence on another human being? How does that break down?
Well, actually, alcohol tends to be the number one.
Cause?
Most of the guys say I have a drug problem, and they can't really afford all the drugs they wish they could use. You know, they'd much rather have cocaine, but most of them can't afford the cocaine. But alcohol tends to be your number one problem with violent crime. You know, people don't get stoned and go rob. You know, they can't get out of the living room most of the time. So
they get in a fight.
Right.
And so basically what we're dealing with is folks whose state of mind was impaired with some drug or alcohol, and their inhibitions, I guess, are reduced.
Right. Well, your number one problems with crime are fatherless boys. And if you look at the last 2 verses of Malachi, which is the last book in the Old Testament, says, I'll turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to the fathers, lest I smite the land with a curse. Well, if you look at the history of America, every time you've had a revival, it has caused men to reunite with their families, to raise their boys, and crime goes down. Then the revival dies out, the men get drunk. We've never had a welfare system until recently. When the man gets drunk, the wife had nowhere to work back then. The whole family's in poverty. The boys aren't getting any attention, and they become criminals. They become rowdies. So it is key. The father is the number one key to reducing crime. but how do you get a father to take care of his family and not spend his paycheck on Friday at a bar someplace?
And this statement is based on the fact that you were in the criminal court system.
I was on criminal court. I've been
2 years, I
the
think you
drug
said?
judge. I was one of the early drug judges. Foxy Sanders got it started, and I took over after Foxy. And we started one of the first drug courts in the country that combined punishing the dealers and then helping the users, because you've got to punish the dealers pretty severely, but you want to help the people that are users that are maybe doing petty things because they're involved in drug activities.
How many cases you think you handled in those two roles?
Gosh, that's an enormous...
Thousands.
You feel like when you're on criminal court, it's like running cattle through a chute.
And the system's really not set up to give any kind of individualized, I guess, attention.
We're so overwhelmed. The probation officers are supposed to have 30 cases, according to national statistics. We have 150 cases. And imagine trying to, if you're a probation officer, trying to keep track of 150 people a month.
Impossible.
I mean, it's impossible. We've overloaded them, and the probation officer is supposed to be helping them get a job, help them get an education. All they have time to do is say, okay, did you get a job? Did you go to school? And most of the inmates, or most of the, and 90% of them are on probation, they don't have decision-making skills. When you say you need to go get a job and the guy can't fill out a job application,
'cause he can't read or
interview,
write.
can't read or write. I've spent this weekend in a Kairos in Angola, which is a prison ministry, and one of the guys that I was with, he couldn't read or write, hadn't had a visit in 16 years, didn't know how to write his mama.
Now, let me stop you and have you address the victims of the crimes, because a lot of folks are going to say, man, this guy's a bleeding heart liberal. You know, this guy killed somebody or he violently attacked somebody. I don't care about those people. What about me? What about us victims? How do you respond to that?
Well, I want to make fewer victims. 90% of crime is committed by people who have already been to prison and did not become better people. The children of prisoners are more likely to become criminals than anybody else. So one of the things I'm involved in is Angel Tree, where you get presents for the children of prisoners as if it's from their parent. You want to heal that relationship. Anybody want to get involved in that? I hope you got pen and paper. It's 888-336-7875.
And again, what they do, what that ministry does is they send presents as if it's the father or the mother who's in prison to the child, so that the child believes that they're getting a present from their parent.
And what I try to tell Christians, the government cannot solve the crime problem. It's a spiritual problem. And what we're talking about is reducing victims by reducing crime. The gospel is God's remedy for crime. The government can't give the people the gospel. Individuals can, but we don't. And what we can do is at Christmas, everybody wants to get toys. Well, include not just toys, but a picture Bible, comic book version of the Bible, low reading level spiritual material, and have an influence. Because unless you're reaching that child and making them better, having toys is not going to make people better.
So based on everything I've heard you discuss right now, you're saying the way to solve or start solving this problem is to educate them, number one, so that they can function in society, to surround them with people who are good models, can model good behavior, and to provide them principles by which they can live their life, which in your case you believe to be the Bible provides very good principles by which one can live their life productively.
Right. I've met all kinds of people coming out of prison that said, I was reading the Bible and I got changed. And they go out, like Ashante Witherspoon did, 27 and a half years in prison. Now he goes and speaks to young people, and he can reach young people. He became a Christian in prison, turned his life around. I imagine somewhere in the country there might be somebody that says, I was reading Socrates, or I was reading Albert Camus, or John Paul Sartre, and I became a better person. But I just haven't met them. You know, have you? Well, you do a lot of legal work. I just don't see people changing like that.
Let's continue this on the next segment, Judge. This is Locke Meredith with the Legal Lines and Judge Bob Downing. We'll be right back.
I'm the best thing you ever had. Only thing I'm guilty of is giving you too much love, making you crazy, making you rat, making me fall, making me suspect. Seem to think I'm playing her game. Don't you know her? This is me.
There's a better way to have fun with history. Visit americaslibrary.gov. Log on, play around, learn something.
Welcome back. I'm Locke Meredith with Legal Lines, and again, very pleased to have Judge Bob Downing. We're talking about, frankly, a passion of his, and that is trying to change the criminal system. Judge, again, thanks for being on the show. We were talking about the fact that because of your history of being involved in criminal trials and the drug court for years and years and thousands of cases, you've determined that these guys keep coming back. It's repeating, and it's because the system's not working, right?
Right. The system is broken.
And so you saying we need to educate them, and we need to surround them with people with have good moral values that can provide guidance to them, preferably their family, and educate them with values that you say come straight out of the Bible, and this prepares them to be a productive citizen.
Right. If you
Why-
just educate somebody, you get a smart criminal unless you teach them morals. And our corrections is wide open right now. They're begging for people to come in and mentor inmates.
Why? Do they know?
They know. They kept the statistics. If you, most states have a 68% repeat offender rate. We have a 50% repeat offender rate. It lowers from 50 by 4% if they get a GED, by 14% if they get a vocational education. But if they attend church half the time they're in prison, there's a 36% reduction in the repeat offender rate. So the most effective is the cheapest because that doesn't cost anything. So Corrections is doing a reentry program where they're trying to teach people vocational skills, how to fill out a job application, things like that.
Government, though, because of this separation of church and state that's been found in the Constitution somewhere, in the Constitution, but interpreted interestingly, I'll say,
Right.
is not allowing that to be done by the government.
Right, and the government shouldn't be doing that.
So
Volunteers
how
should
does
be
the
doing
prison
that.
system do it?
Volunteers can do that. And Chaplain Pierce up at Dixon Correctional is just begging for volunteers. They have a great program. They don't have enough volunteers.
Well, I
There's
know
a guy-
you've been to Kairos. You've been to the prisons a bunch of times. Explain to folks what you do if you volunteer. I think a
Okay.
lot of folks go, man, I don't want to walk
Right.
around hanging out doing high fives with murderers and stuff, you know?
I just spent the whole weekend doing that, and it's amazing because Kairos is having a big impact. It's got Presbyterians, Episcopalians, everybody, black and white, Catholic, all together working to do a very spiritual weekend. And just in 2 years, I did my first one 2 years ago, this is my second one, the number of Christian inmates is expanded exponentially, and a lot of that has to do with Warden Burl Cain. They have New Orleans Theological Seminary there on the prison grounds giving seminary degrees, and the rapes and murders have just dropped precipitously. There's almost no rapes and murders anymore. You know,
Talking about in the prisons?
you're going to have some happen no matter what you do. Satan, doesn't go to sleep. But it's the most effective crime fighter, and the problem is getting people out of the pews and into the prisons and into the streets. There's a guy, Daniel Wells, I wore his shirt. I had
I
enough.
noticed you dressed up for the show today.
Yeah, I've dressed up today. The prison ministry, the angel
Angel
tree,
tree.
and I've had enough. This is a guy, Daniel Wells, used to be a crackhead, and he became a Christian. He has a little place, the first block of Eugene, north of Florida. Somebody let him use a little house. He's teaching kids how to read, teaching them moral principles. But right down the street, they're selling crack, there's hookers, and that guy can use a lot of support. He's got different volunteers coming over, teaching the kids how to read and just showing them some attention. These kids are like sponges.
Well, tell me the process. If somebody wants to go to help Kairos or any of the prisons, first of all, they got to volunteer and notify the folks.
Right.
Are they educated in some way to participate in the program?
You get trained. To go to Kairos, you have to go through Walk to Emmaus, a Crescio, or a discipleship weekend, and that's for people on the outside. And you have to do that before you get to go to a Kairos. So that trains you, and it's an exciting weekend. I gained about 10 pounds. We bring 100 dozen homemade cookies apiece. So if you don't go for anything else,
Got
the
good
homemade
cookies, huh?
cookies are incredible. And it has an incredible impact on the inmates because somebody doing something for them without a hook, without wanting something back, is very rare for them. And you can go on the internet. The internet's my favorite thing. You go Kairos, Kairos, and you can pull up the local. Jim Lambert, who's an attorney in Lafayette, was the leader of this one. There's a Steve Carlton, attorney in Baton Rouge, was the leader of the one that I went to. And they both are lawyers, and they said, well, there's something else I can do, as an attorney,
Do
as a
lawyers
business
have any
person.
kind of particular rapport with the criminals more than just Joe walking off the street?
Well, I don't know if that's the case, but we have benefited so much, to those whom much has been given, much is required. And it's such a fulfilling feeling of helping somebody else that everybody else has given up on.
So the prisoners are very receptive.
Absolutely.
So let's say you just went. What do you do? Go up and say, "Hey, I'm Judge Bob Downing," and they all fall down on their knees, or what happens?
No, it takes them a couple of days to
I
really
imagine it's
trust you.
relational, isn't it?
It's relational. We spend all day long. We've got volunteers that serve us. Your cup never gets empty. I'm sitting at a table, and somebody who's been through Kairos is a volunteer, and we had 50% free people and 50% inmates doing the serving. The Kairos people that have gone through it, the inmates, come back and serve. So you're being waited on all day long. There's never a time when there's not cookies or homemade food or something going on. And there are these little talks where people give the basics of Christianity, and then you give your own personal testimony. A lot of singing. I mean, we even did Kumbaya. We're
Oh, no.
by the second day, really, you're arm in arm, you're singing. There's a little song that goes to the tune of
I guess that's a
Edelweiss.
big deal. I mean, we're laughing about it, but that's a big deal to see big old burly murderers and violent fellas putting their arms around each other,
No, just
not beating
men
each other
in
up.
general. Men in general having relationships and talking about the stuff they've been through. Nobody ever listens to them. So just sitting there in discussion groups, and we're trained to listen, love. We want to listen to them because they never get to talk to anybody from the outside. And incredible stories of, poverty, no father. One guy, listening to him saying, I kept waiting. When I was a child, I kept waiting for my father to come through the door and just tell me he loved me. Now, can you imagine that?
And I imagine it's the
entire
same
childhood?
story over and over.
Over and over and over again.
People do something for a reason.
And of course, there's people that have had everything and got spoiled rotten and became criminals, got in drugs. A lot of crack is incredibly addictive. I've seen judges who can't quit smoking cigarettes think that if they just tell somebody, quit smoking crack or you're going to prison, that'll make them stop. Well, the judge can't even stop smoking a cigarette. Crack's the most addictive thing known to man. It takes drug treatment. That's why I got involved in Synacor, which is a drug treatment program.
Is there a drug treatment program for prisoners?
They have some. It's kind of AA-NA. We don't have nearly enough in the prisons.
All right, I'd like to talk about that and what you would recommend that take place, Judge, on the next segment. This is Locke Meredith in Legal Lines with Judge Bob Downing. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and again, pleased to have on the show Judge Bob Downing. He's a First Circuit Court of Appeal judge here in Louisiana. Judge, thanks again. We're talking about your passion. You've lived this for a long time. It's not just talk about how to help solve the criminal problem in the state. And you've talked about, the bottom line is, you've seen thousands of criminals. You've gone to the prisons, and you're finding the story pretty much the same, and that is they're not educated. They don't have any kind of stable family, particularly with any kind of male figure to model, and they've been given no guidance morally or in terms of virtues. And you've tried to come up with some way or participate in ministries or systems that provide those things. What do you recommend to folks if they're interested in doing this?
Well, Christmas is coming up, and I don't know when this is going to air.
It'll be before Christmas.
And if it airs in the future, they'll have plenty of time before Christmas. But here's some little books. This is Florence Nightingale, Sojourner Truth. These are about $1 a piece, and you can get them through Christian book distributors or Barber Publishing.
And what do they do?
And at Christmas, include a book. You know, poor people, you're not going to change them by getting them toys. Most of them can't read very well, and they need something with morals in it. So these have both low reading levels, pictures, and the moral to the story. Did you know that Florence Nightingale, when she was 16, said in her diary, God spoke to me and called me into his service? Did you know that?
No.
That's because it's not in books anymore. Before 1965, that was in quotes. Then in 1983, the encyclopedias changed it to she thought she heard from God. In 1993, the encyclopedias changed it to she had a feeling she ought to help people at age 16. There's an incredible propaganda war.
Well, let's talk about that, just the culture. It's very interesting. You were showing me a quote from the Attorney General for the United States of America, John Ashcroft, who's leaving the Bush administration. But what did he say?
Well, the ACLU criticized Ashcroft for saying that...
And this is the United States Attorney for our whole country, and he deals with criminals, I guess, more on a high level.
Right. And he said the source of freedom and human dignity is the Creator. The ACLU said that statement encourages religious extremists across the country who are determined to make everyone live by their creed. Beyond that, he demonstrates a profound disregard for the Constitution and Bill of Rights.
Why do you disagree with what the ACLU is saying there?
We can look at Joseph's story. I don't say anything without, if you're going to get in a discussion with me, I bring evidence. Joseph's story was a Supreme Court justice. He was a professor at Harvard, and he wrote what the Constitution meant. And he says, probably at the time of the adoption of the Constitution, it was the general, if not the universal sentiment in America that Christianity ought to receive encouragement from the state. And it says it well remains a problem to be solved in human affairs whether any free government can be permanent where the public worship of God and the support of religion constitute no part of the policy of the government.
Now, you support separation of church and state, right?
I do support separation of church and state.
Where have we gone too far?
We've gone too far in that now we're persecuting and trying to eliminate God completely. If you read Joseph's story, which you can pull up on the internet, the only purpose is to keep one Christian sect from getting more power than the other. I just went to the Massachusetts State Courthouse, and in the Massachusetts State Courthouse in the 1880s, there is a beautiful painting, and it says the War Mothers, and it's these women, they're praying, they're reading their Bible, and it says the War Mothers through the cross to victory. It was put up in there in the 1880s. Then in the rotunda, there's the Pilgrims, and the big painting, it says, for the Lord is our strength, and the Holy One of Israel is our King. And the other side is John Eliot, who is a missionary. He's preaching to the Indians.
Well, and if anyone has been to Washington, D.C. and walked around in the various monuments in the Capitol and the United States Supreme Court, there's evidence that the Christian faith and God is just all over the place in the foundation of it.
Here's a 2-hour tour, spiritual heritage of the United States Capitol done by David Barton, which you can get from www.wallbuilders.com.
Why is, in your opinion, there's so much animosity towards this discussion? Because I'm sure we'll get some calls disagreeing or being upset. So tell me why there's this level of animosity when this opinion is expressed.
Since 1965, or 62 actually, but you see the effect in 65, there's been a rewriting of history. Even in Christian History Made Easy, which is a book put out by a Christian company, the author says the Declaration of Independence was a deist document because it says the laws of nature. Now, if you go to Blackstone, who wrote the commentaries on the laws of England, came out in 1756 or so, this was the only law book most American lawyers have.
Well, I wish that's the case now.
Yes. If you look, and you can pull it up on the internet, Section 39 says the laws of nature are the laws which God, as the great clockmaker, put in effect that run
So he
everything.
defines it.
And if you stop there, the deist believed the law of the great clockmaker. But he goes on to say if man's reason were perfect, he could figure out God's law. But he says since the fall of the first man, Adam, that man's reason has been imperfect. And then the next section, Section 40, says the laws of nature's God. These are only found in the Holy Scripture. Because man's reason was imperfect, because of original sin, God has had to reveal himself, and it's only found in the Holy Scripture. Well, if you look at the source of the laws of nature and the laws of nature's God, you clearly see that it's a Christian reference. Now, our history books say it is a deist reference now. How can they say that? If you Notice the Supreme Court has never quoted Joseph's story, and Joseph's story, this is the 1830s. This is shortly after the American Revolution. John Quincy Adams and some of those gentlemen were still alive. John Quincy Adams, in a speech in 1837 on July 4th, relates the birth of the nation to the birth of the Savior and says that our histories are intertwined and that we are the city on a hill.
So you're saying the animosity towards this type of conversation is because people are just not educated, they're just ignorant about really the true historical foundation of the nation?
Correct. And there are people who want to change the history. Now, why would you take out of quotes, out of her diary, and change God spoke to me to she had a feeling she ought to help people? If you get the Black Achievers series, the new books on Sojourner Truth, there's no reference to the G word. And yet, if you get an older book that actually quotes her, she can't finish a sentence without talking about God. The same for Harriet Tubman, the same for George Washington Carver.
What's the motivation, do you think?
Don't want to offend anybody by having a reference to a G reference.
Politically correct.
Now, in public schools, you have the absolute right to go back and get the original source. A child could give a report on Florence Nightingale. You can pull her diary up on the internet. And you can get an older book that has the quote, and you can quote that. Now, if a teacher says, oh, you can't say that, she's wrong, because you have the right to quote what other people said in a historical context.
What else would you tell folks who want to help the criminal system work? You're saying send them books that are accurate.
Good moral values. You know, I'll ask, we need some books for the prison. People send murder mysteries and those Harlequin novels. What are you thinking? You know, we don't need a murder mystery at a prison. We need, and before I forget this one little thing, this is from Tim Todd Ministries. It is a comic book. It's $2 a piece. It has the rights of religious persons in public schools. You can get these for kids in public schools. It has their rights. They have a little $1 Bible. Do you know, can you pass out Bibles in public schools? Let's answer that in the next segment.
I don't have a clue about that, and we will. Judge, thank you so much for being on the show. We'll get you back in. This is Locke Meredith with Legal Lines and Judge Bob Downing. Thank you for being with us.